Hey, good morning, guys. It's been a couple days since I've been on, so I thought I would do a screencast today. We're going to discuss tractor PTO. That's the objective. I'm going to go through a few notes. You'll use what I say to answer some questions and then just share those with me. The flashback today, I want to know how you're mentally getting along on your isolation and, just circle back to how your break's been. Kind of tough on my end. I'm missing you all. I'm working in the shop. Uh, I guess the upside is I get to hang out with my family, so that's good. But do know that I'm thinking about you all and hope things are going well. So anyway, let's run through tractor PTO. So as we know, PTO stands for power takeoff. And what it does is it takes linear torque from the engine through the transmission, and then we can power implement. So we have a newer transmission design here with the two different ranges, as you can see. That torque is then transferred to the final drive, which is this actual shaft here where the power goes to tires. And then there is a clutch pack here that allows us to engage and disengage this shaft that sticks out the rear end of the tractor, called the power takeoff. We'll talk about the history in a minute. So, that's just a very brief overview of what we see. There are two classifications for PTO types. The first is mechanical, and we call this a clutch type because you actually have to push the clutch in order to pull that power takeoff lever gear into engagement. So you're manually going to push in on the clutch, pull that lever back, and then ease off the clutch, and that's going to start the rotational force of the power takeoff. So tractor here we've got 6610. That was standard equipment. They call that clutching system a two-stage. So if you wanted to stop completely, you're pushing all the way out on the clutch. If you want to just operate the PTO, you're going to push about halfway, and you can feel that clutch gear move in and out. The next type is a hydraulic clutch system. When you see tractors advertised, or when people talk about tractors, they might ask, does it have an independent PTO, or has it got live power? What they're talking about is the ability to engage and disengage that power takeoff without having to clutch. So it's separate from the transmission. It actually uses the hydraulic system to power the PTO, but we still call it part of the final drive because it's all in that rear axle housing. We've got the 6610 again. Ford had this as an option before it was made into standard equipment on this model tractor. So, this is when we would be asking, does it have mechanical PTO or is it live power? That way, there's a separation there, and there's a greater value for some folks as well. When you have the ability to not mess around with the clutch when you're baling hay, when you're running a disc mower, just to engage and disengage that PTO, it can streamline the process, and it can be very handy on the operator's end of things. The early mechanical PTO, one thing to keep in mind if that you are new to operating equipment, so it would just use that linear power coming off of the engine through the transmission and then to the PTO. When we would use a rotating implement, like we see here, this rotary mower, bush hog, even though you turn the PTO off, that mower blade is still spinning, and it is actually causing power transfer to go through the PTO shaft on the implement back to the tractor, and it can cause forward movement in the tractor. So before people realized that this was an issue, there were a lot of wrecks and a lot of injuries because guys would get to the end of the road, they'd shut the mower off, and the tractor would still move. So in the 1960s, we had this invention called an overrunning coupler. And what it does is it just halts that power. So it allows for that PTO shaft and the blades to continue spinning, but it halts that power from going back into the power takeoff of the tractor and keep it moving forward. So it's just a safety mechanism. Again, if you're ever operating an older tractor, like this is an old Massey Ferguson 35, the old Ford 8N, some of those old John Deeres, they didn't have that technology in place. So you really had to be on your game if that you were using an implement that was going to have what we call just PTO runout, where it's going to keep on moving even after you shut the PTO off physically. When we talk about the second classification of power takeoffs, they are separated out by speed. So the speed just determines the rotational speed that is needed for that particular power takeoff shaft. So what does that equipment need to rotate at per minute in order to run optimally? The first is called 540. So again, when we see tractors advertised, especially some of those coming out of the late 70s and 80s, the power takeoff that you had visible was an option. So 540 means that power takeoff is 6 spline. And then we've got, I think it's 22, but it could be 20 spline or 1,000 RPMs. 1904, the power takeoff is invented by the International Harvester Company. And it wasn't until, I think, 1927 that we saw the American Society of Agricultural Engineers, AESE, the American Society of Agricultural Engineers, they said, we're going to use the standard 6 spline. And if you're going to put a power takeoff on a tractor, it's got to be this, because like phone chargers today, we're getting so many different ones out there that there is no universal. And it was determined that the 6 spline was efficient enough, effective enough, strong enough that this is what we need to kind of gravitate to in the industry. So 1,000 RPM was invented, I think, the late 60s, and we just saw that as a need for bigger pieces of equipment that need to run faster, that would have to utilize that shaft. So we would actually see tractors, and you can see here if you look close, there are 2 shafts. So you could operate that engine speed depending upon what that tractor needed necessary. So this is a mid-60s international model, and it's just got the 2 of them there. And when you turn the PTO on, both of them run. They actually are supposed to have a cap, so that one of those shafts, if it's not in use, would be capped. That way you wouldn't have this safety hazard there just rotating free wheel while you're actually using the shaft. A lot of people would just take that off and throw it away, though. Then someone got smart, and like a lot of the advancements we see, John Deere was the first to actually make what they call a dual PTO shaft from the single shaft orifice. So you would remove a clip and you could actually pull that shaft out, flip it over, and stick it in. And technology got so good that when you would do that today, a lot of your what I would call middle tiered tractors, like your 6,000 series John Deere's, right around 75 to 150 horsepower, they all come with this technology. And there's a sensor now in that final drive of the tractor that will tell you if you have the 1,000 splines out, it's going to engage at 1,000, and it'll tell you on your tachometer what RPM range you need to be to actually have 1,000 RPMs coming from that shaft. And if the 540N comes out when you turn the PTO on, it tells you that it's 540, and it tells you on the tachometer where you need to operate that engine for 540 PTO RPMs. So we've come a long way, but without this technology, powering implements would have to be done through another means, whether it's ground driven, where mechanically the wheels turn and then it operates the PTO, or it operates the mechanism of that particular implement, or hydraulically. So PTO, a very valuable component of tractor operations. Guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm happy to get back to you. I do appreciate those of you who are turning in your work. And I'm going to try this weekend to get all the grades that I've got logged in for these last 8 days of class and kind of get you caught up. But hope everyone's doing well. We'll talk again soon next week. Thank you all.